You need citizens, I think, who are clever. You need people who are willing to obviously think out of the box and get creative and aren't afraid of, of some level of failure.
I'm John Lewis, and you're listening to 360 Degree City, a podcast where we talk to people who are working to make cities better. Our hope is that after each episode, you'll start to see your own city from a slightly different angle. Urban planners are often challenged by how long it takes to make decisions and how much money and time it takes to implement change in a city. In this episode, we talk to someone who has found ways to address this problem by thinking about city building a little differently and occasionally using traffic cones, spray chalk, and planters along the way.
Yes, my name is Mike Lydon, and I am the principal at Street Plans. We're a planning and design firm based in Miami, New York, and San Francisco.
We have to apologize for a few Skype connection glitches during our conversation, but you'll get what Mike's talking about. Thanks for joining us today, and look forward to digging into tactical urbanism. So if you could maybe just give us a brief overview of how you got to where you're at in your career today.
Sure. So I've always been interested in cities, and somewhere around the age of 10 or 11, I think, with SimCity, that this could actually be a profession. And if it wasn't, if the MBA didn't come calling, which they didn't, then my second choice was to be a city planner. So I studied it a bit in college, and then had a nice job for a nonprofit in Vermont and then in Boston, both kind of in the transportation and land use spaces, and then made my way back to graduate school in Michigan. And so I studied it formally there, got a grad degree, and then started working in Miami for an urban planning and design firm there. And for me, a lot of the excitement there was in the projects, which were big in scale, very ambitious. But my challenge, I think, or what I felt challenged by, was that the change didn't come fast enough. And seeing that we were struggling to reach, a lot of different types of people in a city who would be impacted or have potential interest in a lot of these kinds of projects that weren't necessarily part of the formal planning process, and that started to get a little bit frustrating for me. So I started to think through what are the ways we can bring different concepts to people rather than just inviting them out to a charrette or a meeting, those are important. We need to have those, but they can't be the only tool in the toolbox in terms of testing new ideas and pushing the conversation.
Great. And so you and your colleagues at Street Plans, you're sort of known as the stewards of the tactical urbanism movement. So could you maybe, for probably the 9 millionth time in your career, describe what tactical urbanism is and how that concept came about? I think you spoke a little bit of it in your sort of early frustrations, but if you could kind of expand on that.
Yeah, so it's an approach to city building or neighborhood building, really, that's all about really short-term, low-cost projects that are intended to create long-term change. So it's really important when you're thinking tactically that you have a strategy that you're trying to implement. You're trying to connect it to a bigger vision or a bigger project or an initiative where, it could be as general as we want a safer city to walk in, or it could be specific that this intersection is dangerous, so we're going to improve this intersection. And then you start to think through what are the things you can do now and to impact that change positively and demonstrate that the way the city is today is not the way it could be tomorrow. So that intent of the project, like why you're doing it and what you're trying to connect it to and trying to create longer term, policy change and or physical change in the built environment is the whole point. And it's a process that really allows anybody where they're at to get engaged. A lot of the projects that we, maybe worked on initially were more just seeing a problem in the built environment, wanting to go fix it, not having a client, not having a budget, and just saying, well, screw it. Like, how do we figure this out and make something happen? And that's really changed a lot for us over the last several years. But as the idea has proliferated, but the intent is just to showcase. It's showing is better than telling.
Hey, I'm Chad, an urban planner and designer at Intelligent Futures. Just wanted to chime in to let you know about the 3 different categories of tactical urbanism projects that are out there. Depending on the cost and duration, tactical urbanism generally falls under one of 3 categories. Demonstration projects are quick and cheap, lasting a couple hours or a couple days. A pilot project has more official materials, but the design is still reversible. Finally, interim projects use more resources and can be maintained for longer. They act as an interim step between demonstration and full-on implementation. Now back to John and Mike. They're talking about tactical urbanism.
So there's a lot of talk and I think maybe some confusion around the idea of tactical urbanism and pop-up or guerrilla urbanism. Can you maybe explain the difference between those kinds of things?
Yeah, so tactical urbanism is kind of a bit more of an umbrella term that encompasses a kind of a spectrum of projects, both in origin in terms of who's behind them and how they're initiated and funded and completed, to the level of duration and intent of the duration of the project. So, a tactical urbanism project can be for 1 hour, and it can be for 1 year. It could be for up to 10 years. There's this, kind of longer lead time, but you've got the ability to bring life and to continue to adjust and tweak something in the interim between the kind of demonstration pilot phase and the long-term build-out of a parcel or, street project or whatever it might be. Tactical urbanism does get confused with the guerrilla side of this stuff, and the guerrilla side can be fun. It's cheeky. A lot of people have gotten really creative on how they've delivered messages without formal permission to make it seem less confrontational. And a great example is just a group in Seattle frustrated by the safety of a bike lane that went under an overpass, and they went out and put up their own flexible delineators to give some vertical separation between moving cars and cyclists. And they called themselves the reasonably polite Seattleites, right? And they wrote a little note about what they did and why they did it, and they shouldn't have to wait, from the city for 5 years to get a street to feel safer when they're using it every day. And so it was, cheeky in a way, but it was a well-received message. And the city responded very positively and said, "You're right. We're going to implement this, but with a different type of baller that's more to our specs and standards." And so that's the kind of like guerrilla action that oftentimes can lead to a very positive conversation. Not always, but very often it can. And it can inspire a city to action to actually implement something. So even in the guerrilla side of things, oftentimes the people behind it might be already connecting it to a plan that exists, which we would suggest, so that you can, while you're advocating in maybe a technically illegal way, you're also putting something out there that has been vetted previously in a process that might have been adopted by city council or by a department or whatnot, and has some sort of formal buy-in. That's kind of the tactical piece of it. So like you say, well, this is in a plan and you've approved this and you're just not doing it. So we're going to go out there and do it for you and show how quick and easy it can be. So the guerrilla stuff is fun. Again, it's cheeky. Yes, it can be technically illegal and you should know the risks involved if you're a practitioner of such projects, which we have been. But ideally, from the guerrilla side of things, you don't want to be acting in a guerrilla way forever. If you do have a successful project where you didn't formally have permission, you end up right back with the people that you were, technically going against in the city without their permission, to be able to make that more permanent. So it behooves everybody to find ways to work together and have a proactive process that creates those collaborations.
Okay, great. And I think that point about collaboration is one of the really interesting parts about what your practice and what you're inspiring, because it gets away from the expert in the ivory tower, city hall, whatever, that tells citizens what they can and can't do and knows better than the citizens that live there, and it really provides a connective tissue for those folks across that spectrum. And I think probably that I hadn't heard of that group in Seattle. So for us nice polite Canadians, that's probably a good model for us to use. Can you maybe tell us a story about one of your favorite projects that you've been involved in that really took that short-term action and really set up and led to longer-term, bigger picture changes?
Oh man, there's so many I'd love to share with you. Maybe I'll share quickly a Canadian project in Hamilton, Ontario in 2013. A young architect named Graham McNally invited me up on behalf of a professional organization involved with in the kind of Hamilton-Burlington region. And they were tired of the streets being unsafe and the city not really acting on a complete streets policy. And they wanted to check out, 5 different intersections of, typical types, from the more suburban to the more downtown and urban, residential, et cetera. And workshop through quick ways to fix them. And he invited me up to that workshop to facilitate it alongside him and his colleagues. And we had about 25 people there, and the Architecture Association put in about $5,000 total for material. So we basically said, okay, let's budget about roughly $1,000 per intersection. Let's go around the city, tour these sites, have the workshop, come up with ideas. The folks on the ground would then take those ideas and actually implement them weeks, and then I would come back and do a more formal lecture as part of I think it's Open Doors or Doors Open Hamilton, where they open lots of beautiful historic buildings and whatnot. And that that would be kind of this event as part of that larger event, and we could actually reveal in that lecture what had been done without permission 2 weeks prior. So we kind of set this up, and this is why it's tactical, because we were thinking through how are we going to make an impact, because we know we're going to do something that's not fully sanctioned by the city, but we want to give it a really big audience and get people behind this before the city would have a chance to really get upset about it. So in any event, we take lots of small bets with these projects, and we had a feeling that not all 5 of these are going to work out exactly the way we want them. They may not all lead to long-term change, but what if one of them does? And one of the intersections I believe near Graham's neighborhood, very beautiful historic, walkable neighborhood near downtown, an intersection called Lock and Herkimer. The idea was to go out and put just traffic cones, or I guess folks in Canada tend to call them witches' hats or pylons, put them out there in the street and screw them into the asphalt and basically fix them there to create a curb extension at this one place where you had a school in one corner, a church on another, and basically this intersection's at the tail end of this really nice little walkable little main street for the neighborhood. And cars are speeding through. It's 2 lanes, one-way street, so that kind of situation. And Graham went out there, he painted the cones, a couple of his colleagues helped him in the middle of the night, he screwed them in. He realized very quickly, and you learn a lot of things on these projects, he learned that it's really hard and not advisable to screw cones into asphalt, get kicked back on the pavement. But anyways, he put little flowers in the top, so people knew that they were not, this is springtime, by the way, people knew it was not a city project. And they're out there, and the kids are crossing the street. The crossing guard's saying she likes it, this is safer. People drive way too fast through here. So long story short, they did that project as well as the others. I came back, gave the lecture. It was really fun, had a great turnout, great audience, beautiful church where the lecture was held. And lo and behold, about probably 6 to 7 days later, the city truly found out what happened, not just at Lock and Herkimer, but around the rest of the city, and they were not happy at all. And there was, I think, an internal memo that was circulated within City Hall in Hamilton saying there was this illegal work that had transpired on the streets. It was dangerous. We can't allow citizens to do this. We need to crack down on it. To say nothing of the existing condition, which had been addressed already with just these cones. And the city actually, that got circulated. It made it onto a local blog, which covers a lot of civic and planning design issues, called Raise the Hammer. And that then kind of blew it up. And so then the advocates responded with a very cheeky kind of social media meme campaign that was making fun of the city for cracking down on something that was working really well and cost so little, and was very consistent with their own policies of complete streets. And then the Association of Architects, Graham and his colleagues, they kind of stepped out from the shadows and said to the city, it was actually us, and this is why we did it, and this was the intent, and we're not trying to make enemies with you. We're otherwise respected professionals that we collaborate with the city, we work with the city, we depend on the city, but we just felt like a strong need to do this with other community members in these different areas. And the city kind of understood the intent, realized there was a point behind it. There wasn't just blatant vandalism. Kind of turned on a dime, and within a week's time of being upset, they're kind of sketching ideas on how they can make it permanent. 4 days later, they'd put out paint, and they put in temporary, more longer lasting, we'll call it a pilot project of vertical delineators to shorten the crossing distance. They painted zebra crossings, and that project led to not only that intersection, which has now there's a permanent bump out there now. There was a lot of cries of "Me too, me too," which is very common with this work. And lo and behold, within a year and a half or 2 years, they'd done more than 100 different intersections using the pilot, temporary to permanent approach. And so that's the scalability that we're talking about. It's like this, in some ways, it's like the urban acupuncture that Jamie Lerner describes, is that you make the pinprick and it can release the tension on the system. And that's exactly what Graham and his colleagues were able to do. That's what we were intending to do, was fix one, show how it can be done, and be able to scale it up, which the city, they've taken that approach and they've run with it. And, they've sanctioned tactical urbanism now for several years. They've kind of, that's been proven. There's not necessarily the same concern or interest about citizens getting engaged in helping the city develop and implement projects. And so that's what you want. That's the ultimate outcome. So that's my favorite Canadian example.
You're listening to 360 Degree City. Today, John is talking to Mike Lydon about tactical urbanism.
So if across the variety of projects you've worked on, from scale and geography, can you share some of the key ingredients you've observed for a successful tactical urbanism process?
I mean, you got to have a city that at some point, if they're not on the front end, at least they're at the end, willing to come along and participate and collaborate, and just actually be willing to truly listen to citizen concerns and find and enable really quick responses. So when you have an open leadership, whether that's a counselor, that's someone who's, a project manager in a department or running a department, whatever it might be, a city manager, a mayor, having political leadership and will to just experiment is critical. If we're talking about like embedding and scaling up tactical urbanism, that's a really key ingredient. You need citizens, I think, who are clever. You need people who are willing to obviously think out of the box and get creative and aren't afraid of, of some level of failure. Certainly failure is part of these projects as well, where you find out that things don't as intended, and you have to be really open to that and be willing to own it. So if you can own that failure in the moment and learn from it, it can be unbelievably productive for what your next step is. So those are some key things, I think, is the openness, both on say a city side, but also as a practitioner, whether you're a city or you're an activist or you're consultant, whatever it might be, to be open to the fact that you may not know exactly how to design everything on a street or a lot or professionally right out of the gate on your computer. Like sometimes you just have to see things out there and learn from it and be humble enough to accept that, even if you're a trained professional, we're not always going to get things 110% right. And what we think this provides value is it allows you to make those mistakes at the scale of $2,000, not $200,000, and better projects in the end.
Terrific. And have you observed differences between citizen-initiated projects and, say, municipal government-initiated projects? Are there very large discrepancies between how a project runs, depending on the genesis?
I would say a lot of it is budget. It's amazing what people can get done for a couple $100s, and there's just no increment of project and like oftentimes ways to facilitate and implement those kinds of projects at a city. Oftentimes cities aren't thinking about all the things they could actually catalyze if they just had little pots of money they could dole out or work on small projects. And that's the key difference, because we see a lot getting done for a little. And when we work with larger governments, whether MPOs, regional governments, city governments, in larger towns and cities, the budgets tend to bloat and the process tends to lengthen, and the ability to kind of gum up the project or slow it down is a possibility. Doesn't always happen, for sure, but it can happen. And that can be a little bit frustrating, if you're on the citizen side or you're like us, you're the consultant, and you're like, well, wait a minute, the whole idea here is to move quickly, not spend a lot of money, and all of a sudden we're in month 6 and the budget has grown by 3x, and we're doing this, for reasons we didn't initially set out to do. That can kind of get a little bit away from the intent of the project. I think, I'm especially speaking about like demonstration projects. If you're working at the interim or the pilot phase and you want something to last a year or two or longer, of course you need more robust materials and a bigger implementation budget, and a little bit more of a facilitated process to figure out what's going to be there. But a lot of this work is the demonstrations. It's the 1 day to 1 week, and you just don't need that long, and you don't need months of meetings leading up to it. In fact, the point of the initial project that can serve as your meeting. That is your focal point of having a discussion about what's on the street, particularly if it's highly removable and reversible.
So we've talked about lots of benefits, and I've seen it happen in a variety of contexts. What are the limits of tactical urbanism?
Scale, like the actual scale of each individual project, can be a limit. We've actually seen some of the tactical projects lead to large scale infrastructure, but it's really rare. You're not solving major urban crises at a citywide or global scale with tactical urbanism alone. It's one piece of the puzzle in a much bigger array of issues and challenges that cities face all over the globe. So that's part of the limitation. Affordable housing, we're not solving. We're not building out light rail networks with TU alone. There are things that are big, meaty problems that we need a lot bigger thinking around and resources to make change. So that's the key part. And I think also the limitations that it's not. It can be misapplied. There's a lot of misunderstandings about tactical urbanism, what it is, what it isn't, what it can do. We touched upon some of those things earlier. Like, it's not just guerrilla. It can be very facilitated and intentional. It's not just it's not just like street art. It's not just a bunch of white guys putting in bike lanes with no permission. There's all these sort of associations with who and how, and we've been involved in enough projects and followed this movement and facilitated this movement long enough that we know that they can work in lots of different kinds of places and lots of different kinds of projects. It's not just street-based walking or cycling.
Yeah, for sure. And I think one of the things that, in reading about, city building in general and coming across critiques of tactical urbanism, I think what it does most of the times that I've seen is tries to paint it with a brush of, well, it can't solve everything, so therefore let's dismiss it, or it's, oversimplified or misapplied, like you said. So I'm sure you've seen your fair share of misinterpretations or oversimplified interpretations of intent and application of the practice.
Yeah, the most egregious one, which I actually was compelled to write a 2-part article in response, was the MoMA here in New York had an exhibition that was around for, several months. That was all about tactical urbanisms for megacities. And the curator behind and the designers who put this very beautiful exhibition into MoMA clearly had no idea about tactical urbanism and its sort of past and the documents and the work that had been done by many people around the globe kind of leading up to it. Or if they did, they were not referencing utilizing that to inform the projects that they were showcasing. So a couple of them had tactical elements, but it was a really big, gross understanding, and it was pretty disappointing to see that the research and the thought wasn't given ahead of time to connect the dots on both the designer side and the curator side. So I had a good, actually with another Canadian, actually based in Hamilton, had a good conversation about that exhibit and how it was a bit off. So it can happen.
Yeah, for sure. Victim of a popular idea that has some traction. So on that note, you've created, I think it's now 5 volumes of your tactical urbanism guides, and you've covering Australia and Italy, New Zealand, Latin America. I think 4 or 5 languages you're translated into, and if I saw right, it's been downloaded over 300,000 times. Did you think that your open source guides would be as popular as they've become?
No, I had no idea. There was the intent of always wanting to share it freely, and we did not invent this whole thing, this whole movement. This is something that's been done in cities for a very long time, and in fact, it's like kind of the original form of city building is to bootstrap and kind of prototype. Not that they were using that word, thousands of years ago. But anyways, our intent was to share it with some colleagues, kind of define what was a kind of a movement that was coalescing 8 or 9 years ago, let's say, and give it some shape. And it's totally taken off. And that's been the beautiful thing about the internet, and the beautiful thing about giving ideas away for free is that people access them and they utilize them and they riff on them and they iterate and they apply to their own cultures. I'm not the right person to go to India and do tactical urbanism, but guess what? We have a guide that's underway that will be focusing on Indian tactical urbanism projects. Like that's awesome. And same thing in Japan. It's like I'm not the person to know everything about that cultural context and the kinds of projects that have happened and successes and failures. But this is a kind of a platform and a movement that we've been able to give shape to and say it's yours. It's everyone's to use when it's appropriate. Just try to use it appropriately in the right situations. So we're very excited by that. And in fact, I think our numbers are well over 600,000 now on downloads and views. And it's we've got this great stats from issue.com and they show you a map where the document's been read in the last 30 days, where it's been read overall, each individual one, then total. And there's really not a country that, there's a few countries in Africa, a couple in Asia. I think there might be one in the Caribbean where this has not been accessed at least once. So it's truly global and it's super exciting. And, we were able to tap into something kind of the right time and right place to give shape to something that people were hungry. And now we see it everywhere. And that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, congratulations, and as a reader and user of the guides, thank you for making those accessible. So your latest, I'll get to a really specific question related to your latest guide, the Tactical Urbanist Guide to Materials and Design. So at Intelligent Futures, we've taken lots of inspiration from your work. So thanks to the inspiration, our office now has things like spray chalk cans and chicken wire and bistro tables. Logistically, what do you do with all this stuff? For you and your team specifically.
I don't remember when you were in Brooklyn. I don't think you actually had a chance to see our office, but it's really about the size of this is actually a conference room, but it's tiny. And so we don't have room to store all these things. And so what we oftentimes do is try to give away the materials that are reusable to local organizations, to project partners, so they have them on hand and can reuse them for more future projects because we just can't store all this stuff. That being said, at any one time we might have, umbrellas and AstroTurf and, measuring wheels and you name it, kind of stacked up in one corner of our office. And we've had a fun time this last month. We had 6 different installations we were doing in Jersey City, so just across 2 rivers here from Brooklyn, and it was all about pedestrian safety. And we just had the intent of the project kind of grew and grew, and we also did these pop-up outreaches where we're making parklets just to tell people about the coming demonstration projects and all that stuff. We had to load into a colleague's car who we were partnering with on the project and kind of keep it either there or in our partnering firm's office. And so the plants and the tempera paint and everything just kind of continued to grow and grow and grow and take over their office, and they're good natured about it. But after Thanksgiving here, I have to go to Lower Manhattan and kind of reclaim some of the materials and give them some space to breathe and work again. So if anyone needs some extra temper paint, just give me a call. I probably will have them in the office.
Perfect. And I think it's funny, the just as a extension of this work and the nature of our office is certainly can be very messy thanks to that, and just what you described. I think it's interesting that it actually describes the whole city building endeavor. It's a messy endeavor. It's not clean and straightforward. So it actually shows how it actually rolls out. Yeah. So one last question that we ask all the guests is if you can tell us about one city, and I know that's hard for a well-traveled urbanist, that you love and why.
I mean, I don't want to cheap out here. I mean, I just love New York. That's why I live here. I love Brooklyn. I wouldn't be anywhere else. But I'm not going to go further into that because I think that should be obvious. It's where I've chosen to live. But I think Barcelona comes to mind. Maybe a combination, maybe the perfect city would be the combination of Naples and Barcelona for me in some ways. The life and energy of the neighborhoods and the densities that are there. And these are beautiful historic cities that, rarely rise over 8 stories. So they feel super in scale, great transit, particularly I'm talking about Barcelona, the beach, the mountains, the food, the nightlife. I mean, you just kind of really, it's hard to find cities where I feel as energized as New York, and I'm definitely that energized in Barcelona. And then in Naples, if you've never been in Italy, it's like going back in time. I imagine it's what Barcelona and many, large European cities were like 50 or 100 years ago. It still kind of feels that way in Naples, and it's cheap and it's dirty and it's loud and it's dense and it's ugly and it's beautiful. It's just like everything that you don't typically get in a European capital these days. It's still kind of present there in Italy, and I find that to be remarkable and invigorating and exciting. So if you ever get a chance, Naples is a good spot to go. But yeah, really, it's Barcelona is one of those top cities for me.
Great, thank you. And I was just in Barcelona about 2 weeks ago, and that was the first time I had been there in, I think, 15 years since I went to school there. So it was really interesting to, that energy I kind of had forgotten a little bit, but to see some of the changes, particularly the bicycle infrastructure. So to grab a bike and go tour around the city was not possible at all when I went to school there. But that what a difference. And it'll be a lot less time between this visit and the next visit based on that experience. Okay, well, thank you so much for taking the time and for joining us, and look forward to seeing the latest guides and the next projects you're coming up with.
Great. Thanks, John. Good to chat with you.
360 Degree City is created by our team at Intelligent Futures, a firm that works at the intersection of urbanism, sustainability, engagement, and design. This week, you also heard from Chad Peters, our planner and designer. You can find show notes and links to Mike's amazing work, as well as other resources, on our website at 360degree.city. We would love it if you could subscribe, rate, and give us a review wherever you get your podcasts. I'm John Lewis. Thanks for stopping by.